Matt, welcome back after the holidays. Did you have a good holiday?
I had the best holiday. It's a series of birthdays. My middle son turned 10 on December 22nd, wife's birthday, December 23rd, Christmas, New Year's, and then my oldest son turned 13 on January 2nd. So it's all done. It's over. We survived. How was your holiday?
You know, it was great. I went to New Jersey, got into we had a big snowstorm up there, and I was expecting they called for like 8 inches. But we had like 4, and I was really, I live in the South, and so I was expecting this like massive blizzard and snow to pile up, and you couldn't get out of the door wouldn't open.
Absolutely.
And man, it was so disappointed because those inches, we had about 4 inches. Within about a couple hours, the roads were clear. There was nothing. It was a non-event up in New Jersey. They do some things right up there. Not many. Their roads, whoever designs the roads, definitely needs to be checked for some, they have the weirdest roads in New Jersey.
Well, they also have some strange laws about insurance for commercial vehicles, so that always segues. But the nice thing about the North is we have all the infrastructure to remove the snow. I love a good snow day, but we did not have any. And now the 8 inches we had a couple weeks ago is all gone. There's nothing here. It's all normal looking fall.
Yeah, I mean, they call for snow down in the South, and you go to the grocery store, everything is bought. I mean, just the threat of snow, they will call schools off. Just calling for it and saying it could snow 1 inch or 2.
Shut the country down.
Schools.
A 1/4 inch might be coming. No roads are safe. Send everyone inside, hunker down. Don't leave the house.
So as a kid, you're like, we had this thing called the snowbird in Chattanooga, and we like, when he came on the air, it was like, Santa Claus or something.
Absolutely.
Like you're getting this gift, and the snowbird would do this dance thing. It was great.
We don't get those as much.
But also, I had classmates that would call into the local news channel. They told them that our school classes had been canceled, and they would report it. Now they eventually put rules in place, but the thing is, like, when one news station reported it, they all did.
Absolutely.
And so, it worked until it didn't.
Everyone wants to be first, and even if you're wrong, at least you're first. And
the way the media works.
I think we saw that this week. So there was all this chatter among different media sources that today was the day that the Supreme Court of the United States was going to weigh in on the IEEPA tariffs, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and lo and behold, no, we didn't get it. We didn't get it today.
No, we didn't. I saw that too, and I talked about what it would mean if we got a ruling based on what we were hearing. It's interesting because we don't know what the Supreme Court's going to rule. I know that you were much closer to how the Supreme Court is likely to rule, or at least have an opinion. I'm not that, it's outside my world of looking at legal opinions, and particularly the Supreme Court. But I have a perspective on freight, but I'd love to hear from your perspective what you think is the Supreme Court is likely to decide, and what that means for, in terms of future decisions legally.
I mean, this is fascinating. So we talked about this together in person at F3, and it was something that gets me energized. I still say that this case is the most important case in my lifetime, probably in many of the listeners' and viewers' lifetime, but ultimately it's a question of separation of powers. Does Congress have the power to give up the ability to raise revenue to the executive branch? Can they do that? That's the first question. The second question is...
Real quick.
Yeah.
Did they give up power, or under the way I think of it, as Donald Trump took power, did he not?
Well, that's an interesting way to look at it. So he can't have the power unless he cites a congressional statute. So when he declared reciprocal tariffs on Liberation Day last year, it was based in this law that Congress passed. So before IEEPA was in fact a law, there was another law called Trading with the Enemies Act. And so even if the president has emergency powers, Congress tries to define them in some context. And so that's what IEEPA was a defining of power for economic activity during an emergency. And again, the emergency gets declared by the president. There's no real way to oversight like what he considers an emergency unless Congress with a supermajority says, hey, this isn't an emergency. So the two questions in this case is, one, can Congress even give up the raising of revenue? So IEEPA, if you said, hey, we're not going to allow any widgets from this country, IEEPA 1,000,000% lets you do that. But what IEEPA doesn't explicitly say, which is the second question, can IEEPA be used to raise revenue? And that's the question that the Supreme Court is wrestling with. So these two questions are fundamental to the American democracy and the three-legged stool that is our Constitution.
Now, what does IEEPA stand for, first of all, Matt?
Yeah, it is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. It was started by Jimmy Carter back in the day. He also signed the Motor Carrier Act, so he's done a lot in the world of transportation and logistics. But that's what IEEPA stands for. It's really the ability to declare an emergency and then do sweeping moves as it relates to the economy. And that's what IEEPA is all about.
I like this Trading with Enemies Act. It's like the Department of War. It's
Absolutely.
Like the Department of Defense is a soft way of saying we go to war. We
That's right.
kick ass
That's right.
and take names. Where it's the Department of War, you're like, maybe that's why they're winning. Have you thought about that? The branding is
It's all about framing the issue. You're right. You get a cool name.
Look, I think Donald Trump has gotten too big at least under his watch, two big military victories.
Yeah.
One in Iran and the other in Venezuela. And so maybe the Department of War is the reason. But so trading with enemies is basically, what did that rule say?
This is like the World War I era laws. It basically said, hey, if we're at war with somebody and we're in a state of conflict, we're going to be able to take certain precautions of working with the enemies. We can ban companies from importing from enemies. We can really restrict things. But ultimately, the Trading with the Enemies Act was broader, I believe, than IEEPA is today. So in Jimmy Carter's era, he's like, let's more closely define what an emergency is and what powers you get. And there are certain people in whether they're Republicans or Democrats that might even say that the IEEPA law itself is illegal. Like, you can't restrict the emergency power of the executive. Like, you don't get to come and tell me what my powers are. However, our Supreme Court has not ruled that way, but stranger things have happened.
Is that an argument that is in front of the Supreme Court? Is that that basically the president should have the right to declare an emergency as he sees fit?
Yeah, so that is absolutely true. So the way that IEEPA is structured is president declares an emergency, and then if Congress doesn't like it, a simple majority can override that, but the president can veto it. We saw that with the COVID emergency declaration. Essentially, the president agreed with Congress, so the emergency went away. But if you want to make the emergency really go away, and the president doesn't want to, you need a supermajority. Now, there are people within the White House today, I believe, and there are Democrats who agree with this too, is that if we're in a real emergency, I don't need Congress to act. I have plenary power to take care of the citizens. But you get this question of like, what's an emergency? And that's what causes so much friction. So the IEEPA statute, as we see it, is we generally think it's a constitutional law, and we're questioning whether the revenue raising is legal or not.
But so Donald Trump is sort of shaped this narrative that it is raising revenue. Eventually, we're not going to have income taxes because he's got the External Revenue Agency.
I stopped paying my taxes. Don't listen to me. Don't take legal advice or don't take financial advice.
You should be careful what you say. I'm going to give you legal advice, not to say you stop paying your taxes.
Right. That's right.
You never know where that could come back to haunt you.
My accountant says pay your taxes, and I pay my taxes. Absolutely.
All right. I'm trying to keep you out of jail. I would hate that you missed a form or something, and that comes back, and this gets played in a courtroom.
I'm with you. I appreciate it.
Just saying, just trying to keep you out of jail. So, but he has certainly shaped it as hey, I'm raising revenue. We're going to cut taxes because of it. But fundamentally, the law, the way it was written, at least in the Federal Register, is this is an emergency, right? And I am curious about this. Whereas Donald Trump comes out and says something like, let's walk through a courtroom. If you were a CEO of a company and there was an accident, let's say, that involved a truck, and the CEO said, we just got rid of anti-lock brakes because it saved money, and he tells his investors, that is going to be, or we just implemented this thing, right? And it ends up causing problems. Let's say they end up implementing a new set of trucks, and he's like, how much money it's going to save them. But then the brakes fell on that truck. Ultimately, that's going to be played in a courtroom as proof that the company was negligent. In its desire to make more money, it was negligent. Okay,
that was the argument in the Wabash case. You're exactly right. That is exactly what they do.
That is a CEO statement. And effectively, in the world of politics, Donald Trump is our chief executive officer, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So in the Supreme Court, do they play the messages of the administration and say, this is how Donald Trump, this is how this administration is actually, or I guess the executive branch or whatever they would say, is positioning this as a revenue generator and not an emergency act. Does that play inside the Supreme Court, or does he get a pass as a politician?
So they are going to be part of the record. So for the folks who are listening, kind of how this works is this case was first in the Court of International Trade, which is a federal U.S. court. And then it got appealed to the federal appellate court, and then it got to appealed to SCOTUS. In all of these briefs, they take quotes from different people in administration as well as the president saying, even though you call it an emergency, and that's fine, you get to call emergencies. We're not going to challenge like whether you think it's an emergency truly or not. But what they will say is that you are raising revenue. And that is something that is within the bounds of Congress. And if Congress wants to change the two fundamental powers they have, declaring war and raising revenue, if they're going to give those powers up, they better say it explicitly in the document. And this is part of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's argument. So the statements Trump makes that this is an emergency, but the raising of revenue is secondary in the legal arguments. Ultimately, what they're saying is we want to raise revenue through this mechanism of IEEPA. And that is what is really the issue in this case.
But it's interesting. And again, we're thinking about the mind of Donald Trump, who takes victory on everything.
That's right.
Does that make their case that much more complicated, or does the Supreme Court recognize that Donald Trump's a loose cannon? And does he get a pass as a as a sort of a, just a very verbose? I mean, it's Donald Trump. I don't have to define it for the audience.
Yeah.
But does he get a pass in some ways? Or
I would say he might get a pass to an extent, but what the Supreme Court's really looking at is, first, did that delegation of power, was that legal? It doesn't matter what Donald Trump says. Like, they're going to look and say, does Congress even have the power to give this up? And then secondarily, they're going to say, where in the text of this law of IEEPA does it say you can raise money? Because the word tariff never appears. And Congress knows how to write that word. So even if Trump says certain things, they're not going to focus in that specifically. And they're also going to look at like the implications. So if you let one president do this, that power stays with that office forever.
So Matt, let me understand this. So IEEPA is not a tariff law?
No. IEEPA is, so the way to look at this is we all want and we need the executive branch to be able to operate in an emergency. If the Yellowstone caldera explodes, or if an asteroid is coming into the U.S. or into the Earth generally, we're not going to go to Congress and say, hey, can you pass a bill to fund this missile to stop the asteroid? They're not going to do that. The president can act. Now, what ends up happening is IEEPA says, well, here are the types of actions you can do. You can set up a quota for where you're bringing in things to the country. You can say, we'll allow 1,000 windshield washers, fluid systems from this manufacturer, and that's it. We're not going to, so you can encourage domestic growth or whatever. Or you can outright ban them and say nothing from this country is allowed in our country. But what it doesn't say is you can use the emergency to find new revenue. You can't well, we don't know if you can. I suspect the Supreme Court will vote against Trump, but we'll get into that in a moment, I imagine.
So if the Supreme Court has to decide on whether tariffs are allowed under IEEPA, so they're not going to say that he's going to clearly have the right to have his IEEPA powers, right?
Yes, IEEPA power is there. He has that power.
But what you're saying is that it does not allow him, or is not permitted or permits to, there's no permission, if you will. I guess that is what permitted means. But there is nothing permissioned in the ability to go, but it's not explicit. So It doesn't say he can't. Right. Yeah.
So that is the argument that the administration made, is they say there's no prohibition in the statute that says we can't raise revenue. Clearly, we have the power to say nothing from these foreign countries comes into our borders. They can absolutely do that. But what it doesn't say is you can restrict with tariffs. What the other side says is, I get that. We have all these other tariff statutes. If you want to use tariffs, here's the apparatus. We clearly in this law never use the word. And so if Congress means to give you something, They better explicitly say that, because if they don't explicitly say that, you don't get that power.
So Matt, why did he use IEPA?
Oh, it's easy. I mean, that is because it is easy.
Because it's Section 232 and the 330 and
they take time. They have review. They have all these other nuances of
they have limited duration too.
Yeah, exactly.
What is it? Section 330 or something?
They have it. So yeah, all these different.
It's a 6 month. You can do up to 50%, but it's only allowed for 6 months. Then it has to be reviewed.
Exactly. So in the other, because again, Congress has the authority to raise revenue. They will set guardrails and say, when you want to use tariffs, here's how you do it. You have to do these studies. Here's the amount you can maximum mark it up. Here's the duration. You have to come back and talk to us. They know how to make it happen in the normal way. IEPA is, there's an emergency. I will not use any other authority, and I will, for the first time in American history, IEPA has been used to raise revenue. And what everyone wants to say, tariffs are a tax. The importer pays that. Maybe they pass it on, maybe they don't. But this is why I get so concerned, because this is the part that I talk about, Craig, and they talk in the Supreme Court a little bit about this. We may like the tariffs that Trump put in place. We may love them, actually. But the next person in office, if they say, oh, I think climate change is an emergency, and any internal combustion engine, any component to an internal combustion engine needs a 5,000% tariff, you couldn't stop it. And so the power, once you have it, they never give it up. And so I'm very skeptical of emergency powers that are broadly used to do all sorts of interesting things.
So was that, did they make that argument in the fight when they were arguing in front of the Supreme Court that is the potential?
Yeah. So this is a great piece. And I'll once again, say great job to the United States Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce is the largest lobby or activist organization for businesses in the world. They are incredibly powerful. And many associations were hesitant, we'll say hesitant, to file an amicus brief, which is a friend of the court brief in these proceedings. But the Chamber did. And the Chamber argued exactly what I just outlined. One, that the statute doesn't say the word tariff. Two, it's not really a good delegation of authority. They never have done this before. But three, that power stays forever. And once another president comes into office, if that power has been established, Craig, every president from now until the end of time, day one, emergency, whatever you want, fentanyl, trade debt, whatever, and you get to put whatever pet project you had in and no power of Congress to stop you. That's what the Chamber was arguing. And I'm huge fan of what they do in this particular case.
Yeah, by the way, the old president was the old Landstar. He was the Landstar CEO, became the head of Chamber years ago.
That's awesome.
Just, trucking, obviously.
We move everything. We do.
We are so keyed up in the economy. So that makes complete sense. Let's talk a little bit about what this all means. I have heard, again, outside my lane, I'm not a constitutional scholar, I'm not an attorney. My read of the situation is that from what I've read is the Supreme Court is likely to say that he exceeded his powers, that Donald Trump does not have the power to issue the IEPA tariffs or the tariffs under IEPA as you've described it. Therefore, they must stop doing that, or he must stop immediately doing that. That's the sort of the framework. However, the question then becomes, what does that mean? And I'd love to get your take on what you think is going to happen, what the Supreme Court is going to demand that this administration does. And I actually got a note from someone who's very close to the White House, who's keyed in on this story. But I'd love to get your take before I read this off, because I think this is an interesting take.
Yeah, I think before I heard the oral arguments, I really did think the Trump administration would ultimately be successful. I thought that they were going to win based on the way our court is structured. But after hearing the arguments, and it was like 2.5 hours long, I believe you're going to have maybe 5-4, maybe even 6-3 against Trump. I think Justice Gorsuch, I think Justice Roberts, and I think Justice Coney Barrett is likely to say this was a use of IEPA that is not sanctioned by the Constitution. And if that happens, Oh my goodness. One factor I think immediately is shippers in the United States will have an interest and a desire to pull things forward because the administration right now is coming up with countermeasures. How can they still collect tariffs if this particular use is not permissible? But the other thing is what Costco's done. So Costco, great American retailer, has sued the administration in the Court of International Trade saying, hey, all that money that we paid you, we'd like it back, please. And that could be this massive influx.
There's been a couple of dozen major Fortune 1000 importers that have also joined. I think Revlon was one of those.
Absolutely.
So they would get, effectively the way I understand it is that the Supreme Court would rule, you can't do this. You're not allowed to do it. We're not going to permit it. There's a refund process that, Costco would get. It's unclear how long that would take, whether it's very unclear from what I can see on what that process is because this is unprecedented at that point, right?
Yeah, I think that they did talk about that during the hearing and the oral argument, like how messy would this be? And the justices and both counsel for both the VOS selections and learning resources, as well as the administration, were like, yeah, this would be difficult. This is potentially hundreds of billions of dollars would have to get pulled back and given back to businesses. But we've done stranger things. And what I remind people is if it's illegal when the Supreme Court rules, it was illegal from the very beginning. Like it was found illegal twice already. So that money is not going to be like, well, we'll just keep it. And going forward, there won't be any more tariffs. It'll be, all right, we got to give you your money back. And then the money starts going back.
Oh man, the fraud, the Somalians are going to be like, we imported all of this stuff.
It'd be amazing. It'd be amazing.
Yeah. I think, who knows, what ends up. That's going to be a complete mess. I want to read something that somebody sent me. Basically, this is somebody close to the White House said that the visors inside the White House believe that the Supreme Court's ultimately going to rule that he overstepped his bounds. But this is an interesting take that basically the economic uncertainty and its detrimental impact on the American people weren't an exception. Basically, Donald Trump did not have the power to do this, but they're going to let it slide. Now, I don't know if this is wishful thinking among the administration or whether this is legitimate, but basically said they're going to let it slide this one time, but moving forward, you will not be permitted to use IEEPA to levy tariffs. Apparently, they invoked a similar approach during his first term when there was an immigration issue that went up in front of SCOTUS. And I was told by somebody who's, again, much closer to the Supreme Court that Justice Roberts tends to not like to legislate from the bench and wants to say, hey, let's, the thesis that this holds is they would basically say, look, we're going to give you a pass this one time, sort of a slap on the hand, is we're going to let these stay. We're not going to force you to reverse them. You just can't do it going forward. And I'm curious, do you think that holds water, or is that wishful thinking among people that I've talked to?
It would be a very good outcome potentially for the administration not to have to issue refunds. There is certainly precedent from the Supreme Court to say, we're going to make a ruling and this ruling can never be used in any future case. So it has no precedential value, no stare decisis. You don't get to take this case and say, well, you let Trump do it, so AOC can do it too. Nope, not going to do it. My feeling is that if that were the argument or the needle that Roberts was going to thread, it would take an enormous amount of money away from American businesses. Because that's what the U.S. Chamber of Commerce ends up arguing is you can make these things. And there's a lot of legal issues and a lot of things we can talk about separation of powers. But practically, there's a bunch of American companies that are going bankrupt or are suffering higher costs because of an illegal action or potentially legal action by the United States president and the Trump administration. So it would basically say, hey, we understand this was an overreach, but hey, Costco, you don't get your 10 million or 100 million or $1 billion back. And I don't know that they would do it. My feeling, and again, I could be wrong, is that they're going to rule against the Trump administration and there will be a refund process. Now, what does that mean for the American population, the American consumer? Golly, I don't know, but the businesses will get their money.
It's got to be nothing for the American consumer because ultimately, I mean, the argument is, and I'll make it, is that clearly the tariffs are not impacting at a substantial level the price of goods sold. I mean, I've had this argument. Like I was for some of Donald Trump's industrial policies, including, I thought, selected use of tariffs. And I specifically was focused on China because I think China is a national security issue. I think tariffs do, while they're a tax, they do create incentives for companies to move. I wouldn't have rolled out the tariffs the way Donald Trump did, but I was public about my support of a more industrial policy that's more America focused. I think that's better for truckers. I think it's better for railroads. I think having a bigger industrial base is important. And tariffs create the friction because it's a cost and it's a compliance requirement. You've got to comply with this stuff. It just increases the friction of having offshore supply chains. And so I was largely for it. Again, I'm not endorsing how we got here because I think it was mismanaged, miscommunicated, and somewhat of a disaster the way it was rolled out. But at the end of the day, the reality is that what we have is we have these tariffs in place. The economists, and I mean broadly, generally, and the academics argued, very, very violently argued.
Where's Jason Miller? We're talking about Jason, I think.
Well, he's in the room. He's in the room.
Absolutely.
He's with us here. That it was going to create hyperinflation, that we're going to have this massive run on prices across the economy. And it didn't happen. We have seen there are some anecdotal people quote bananas or coffee or chocolate and say, well, that is more expensive, or you'll have people that are importing that talked about their own expenses. But as it relates to consumers and inflation across the economy, tariffs have not created hyperinflation. In fact, you could argue, and there's a lot of data here, that a number of major goods have actually had price deterioration, not increases. And those are eggs. Price of eggs have come down substantially. Of course, that was the bird flu. Price of milk has come down substantially. Energy prices, price of oil has come down substantially. Even rents that are a part of the inflation index, the cost of housing has come down substantially. In fact, the stuff that's driving the inflationary inputs is healthcare costs, which is not a tariff issue. Maybe at the edges it is, but mostly it's a service problem, an administrative cost problem. And insurance, which again is not a tariff issue. We have not seen these tariffs cause a massive increase on consumers to the degree that people thought they were. So when you say, are consumers going to get money back? I would say, for what? Like, unless I bought coffee or chocolate, and these very select nuances, automobiles, Ford automobiles. I mean, look, we can come up with individual product categories, but it has not created this massive inflationary bubble that has destroyed our economy. Now, I believe the uncertainty principle and the reason we haven't seen inflation, and I would argue, in fact, that the tariffs may have been deflationary because they sapped a lot of demand and investment and created so much uncertainty that businesses stopped hiring to the degree they were, stopped adding plants and manufacturing facilities. I think that absolutely sapped the economy. And I think you could make an argument, and I would agree, that tariffs were bad for the economic expansion of our economy. Absolutely, I believe that's the case. But it has not been something that consumers have been faced with. Businesses have been faced with a lot of uncertainty, but consumers have not.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, I think a lot of major retailers, for example, had the opinion early on that the use of IEEPA tariffs were not going to be found constitutional. And so in their time frame, they I believe, made the calculus of, I'll eat those costs myself. I won't pass those on to the consumer. But on the business to business side, if you're buying trucks or you're buying trailers, there were certainly some increases in buying that equipment. So on the B2B side, there was certainly some impact, but the consumer, I think you're exactly right. I think those costs were not passed on to the consumer, but we're going to see maybe if these tariffs are found to be constitutional, I suspect you're going to see them trickle down then, because I think a lot of these big companies that have the capacity to absorb them will. But if they're found that these things stick around, it'd be interesting.
Classic economics would tell you otherwise. And the reason I say that is if consumers are not buying, if the dogs are not eating the food, then you can't pass on price increases to consumers. At the end of the day, what you end up with is margin compression. Because like I run businesses, you run businesses. I have some consumer-oriented businesses. There's a finite ceiling. It doesn't matter what my input costs are. So I have magazines, right? We sell magazines, and we have to go buy paper. And there have been, largely because paper mills have been shut down all over the country. We don't tariffs really are. Paper printed materials are exempt from
Interesting. I did not know that.
It's something to do with the First Amendment.
I like that. That's my favorite amendment.
As a constitutional scholar, you should know this, I think. But it's something to do with the fact that printed materials are exempt from tariffs because it is a First Amendment. At least that's my understanding of it. Maybe
that sounds right. I'll do some research for our next show. I'll make sure.
You should do it next. Anyways, so our input costs have gone up. We've seen paper price increases. We've seen all this stuff. But I have to eat it because I can't pass it on to consumers. There's only a certain finite number that a consumer will buy. And so on the demand side, it doesn't matter if my input costs have gone up. Like the consumers don't have any sympathy for my input costs going up.
That's right. That's
and
true.
The demand is finite. And I think that's what businesses have learned is that no matter what their input costs are, there's a finite number that they can pass on to consumers. Consumers are going to stop buying the products, or they're going to substitute for cheaper products versus buying the higher end products. And I think that's what we're seeing. I mean, a lot of shrinkflation is really related to that, where companies have not changed the price of the goods, but are giving you slightly less quantity. There's less M&Ms in the bag.
That's right.
Than there were before.
It makes sense because ultimately, like you look at the American consumer, credit card debt is so high, student loan debt is high, automobile loan delinquencies are up. There's a lot of pressure on the consumer. But as we talk about margin compression, I'd love to get your thoughts on this incredible bill in Congress right now. We've talked a little bit privately, the Freight Brokers Safety Act. This idea that you were going to...
It's the dumbest rule. Like, there's a lot of stupidity in Congress. Like, I fundamentally believe that freight brokers should have a larger level of responsibility and compliance. It's my asset-based background, and so there's going to be some freight brokers that I'm are going to think this is an antithesis to. Like, it's a sin that I say that, and I'm blasphemy of saying brokers should have some responsibility. I believe that. I believe if you are, and I understand why they don't, and I understand there's a lot of legal precedent in this. I also understand that the economic model gets quite challenged when they do have liability. Their arguments would be like, they don't know who's driving the truck, but they also don't want to know who's driving the truck because they also know people like yourself, not you, but other people on the other side will use that against them. I get all that. Like, I understand that. But the fact that this rule, to unpack what this dumbass law said, because it's the worst piece of trucking legislation, which is it's a very high bar to be the worst piece that I've ever seen.
It's ridiculous. Well, we have an article up at FreightWaves right now that breaks down this law. And I've had a lot of people send me, hey, this is a good piece. Thanks for breaking it down. But in a nutshell, some plaintiff lawyers got a hold of a family, and the family had a horrible accident that involved the broker. They went to a congressman. They said, here's what we want to try and do. And here's what the bill kind of does. It says, if you're a freight broker and you contract with a motor carrier, and that motor carrier has let's say 3 violations of FMCSA regulations over a period of time, you have to pay a 10% fee that goes to the federal government, to the Highway Trust Fund. And there's other things if that broker and that motor carrier involved in an accident. And when I first look at this, I go, well, most motor carriers have 3 somewhat violations, whether they're safety or maintenance or something else, they have those things already. So almost everyone's going to be at fault. But you had a great point when we talked about was it incentivizes chameleon carriers. It incentivizes people with no records.
Look, you can go to the safest companies in America. In fact, if you look statistically about the safest companies, freight companies in America, it's the parcel guys. It's because they pay very well. They have UPS, FedEx, and DHL have the best safety records among major transportation trucking companies. And a lot of it has to do with their business models allow for that. They pay better. They have very low turnover. UPS specifically is a union company. And so the Teamsters do tend to be a more stable work environment, and therefore it becomes more attractive for the best in quality drivers. Also, companies like Walmart pay premiums and tend to have a better safety record. There is a shocking correlation, and I'm using that facetiously, between how much you pay a driver and the quality of life and the safety you get. I mean, when you don't pay for high quality drivers, you're going to be less safe. And so when you look at the size of these companies, they all, no matter how safe they are, have more than the violations that would trigger the bill. So this means that DHL, FedEx, and UPS, if you ship with them, you would be in violation as the rule is written because they have a number of DOTs assigned. I think it's a couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I want to build off this, because your point's really well taken. We are once again looking at the brokers to act as guarantors of the performance of the motor carrier. And if we think there's an unsafe motor carrier on the road, and God knows there are, that is the purview of the FMCSA and the broader Department of Transportation.
Okay, so Matt, I think we're talking about two different things. Because at the end of the day, FMCSA is responsible for regulating motor carriers. Mm-hmm. And they have failed at their job at scale. They have not, a lot of it's resource driven.
Yeah.
They weren't motivated to sort of do some of the things. They're sort of in denial, at least under the Biden administration. They claimed that they weren't sure if freight fraud was a real thing. I don't know how they got to that conclusion. I think they didn't want to deal with it. We're uncertain. We're going to do it. But I ultimately, again, I do think brokers should have some responsibility in who they screen. The problem I have with this particular rule is that, and to your point, it means that any company of scale with more than potentially 20 trucks is not going to be able to haul broker freight because brokers are not going to want to pay the penalty for hiring them.
Exactly.
So it means that your JB Hunts and your Swifts and your Werners and no matter how, I mentioned these mega carriers and, some of these drivers who have opinions of all these companies are going to be, let them go out of business. But it's going to impact you too, driver. Your business is going to be impacted because now what they're saying is that any violations within a period of time, and the larger companies just have more scale to them, which means they're more likely, just a larger sample size, are more likely to have to have some type of DOT violation.
And this is the key thing I think you've identified, is that we have members of Congress who want to do the right thing. They want to make the road safer. And I applaud anybody who wants to make the road safer for anyone in the motoring public. But if they don't understand how supply chains work or how things move, they can't propose reasonable things. I'm with you. I think if the FMCSA and DOT got double the budget, and I would love to advocate for them getting way more resources to go after this stuff, you can't legally define what's an unsafe motor carrier and still let them haul freight. There's no reason.
The DOT budget is interesting because so much of it goes to the FAA. And
those are very safe.
Well, look, the FAA has I'm a pilot, and I have beef. Every pilot, truck driver, has a beef with the FMCSA. I got a beef with the FAA. We all do. Every pilot, even people that work at the FAA, have a beef with the FAA. A lot of them are pilots. But the safety record of the FAA, the reason pilots had beef with the FAA is largely because of the high levels of restrictions they put on and the slow meandering of rule making that it takes to get in the FAA and the lack of innovation. But what is really interesting about the Department of Transportation is something like 82% of the people that work at the DOT work for the Federal Aviation Administration. 18% work on every other form of transportation. Consumer automobile included in that 18%. The railroads, you go through all of the different versions of modes, we get left with the 18% of the people. And so it's a fascinating picture of how much resources and attention goes towards the aviation environment versus go into the highways and stuff. And so the FMCSA, I think, deserves a lot of heat. But I also think the problem is it's an unloved administration.
No one loves trucks. You're right. No one loves trucks. No one loves what we do.
And I'd say Sean Duffy's done a good job because he actually is, if you go on his and you listen to his public statements or go on his feed, he's talking about trucking a couple times a week.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is probably the first DOT administrator in years that actually does that. And so I think it's interesting because the FMCSA's job is to manage this. And by pushing it onto the broker, what they are communicating very clearly is that the broker should have some responsibility to screen the truckers. And what I think is the foundation of this bill, which I agree with, is that we need to get rid of the chameleon carriers. We need to get rid of the bad actors. This is not the way to affect that.
It just incentivizes it. Give me someone who's not no defects. Okay,
why
this is
would
great.
I give, if I'm a broker, why would I give a load to JB Hunt or Swift or Warner, who have great safety records? Why would I give a load to them if I'm going to have to pay a penalty? I'm going to give it to, whomever. John Bill Trucking that has one truck.
Not my trucking company.
Started yesterday.
$750,000 of liability insurance, ready to rock and roll.
Because otherwise I can't I'm going to be out of business.
What I hope is, as our country becomes more familiar with what it is that the transportation and trucking industry does, regulations will become more.
You know what we need, Matt?
What's that?
We need a landman of trucking. We need an entertainment show. We need a TV show that takes have you seen Landman?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and I think Yellowstone does this also very well, where they take these concepts, and there's this scene in Yellowstone where it's the protester and she's like anti-animal, like a PETA. It's clearly PETA, but yeah. I don't think they call it PETA.
They can't say it.
And there's this great scene where John Dutton is talking to her about how her vegan food is made. And he talks about all the animals that it took to kill. And he has this thing, how cute does the animal need to be before you care? And the same thing happened on the oil patch on Landman, where he goes out in front of all these windmills because he's got this super hot, super intense lawyer that he's educating. And she's like, hates oil industry. She's just a lawyer because you guys get anybody. Anybody who'll pay you, you'll take the case. But there's a scene out there where he's pointing at the windmills and she's so anti-oil, and he explains why you need oil and how oil enabled us to create these windmills, and he makes the case. And what I think is really interesting about that is that the National Petroleum Industry Association realized that this was an interesting opportunity to educate the public about the importance of energy. It was no longer about oil is bad and we're all going to die from this boiling planet and the oil companies are all bad. It was, hey, this is an opportunity to create a relatable set of narratives that are exciting because it's on TV. It's a little dramatic. It highlights some of the more, rough parts of the energy industry, but it makes it interesting and you can educate the public. And I think that's what trucking needs, is we need to educate Congress. We need to educate the FMCSA. We need to educate the public on these types of issues, or we're going to get these policies that make zero sense.
Well, you're the best position to do this, Craig. You have the family, you have the story. There's no doubt there's an appetite for Americans to understand our industry. They think of trucking as ice road truckers, or maybe the Irishman on Netflix with the old Teamsters. But there's a different side of the trucking industry that you probably could tell that story better than just about anybody.
I think, I think there is the opportunity to tell the story in a way that the public can appreciate. But I think our industry needs a landman. We need a Yellowstone. And I think you've got to make it interesting for the public to get it, but also provide these educational opportunities, or you're going to end up with these crazy rules that make no sense. I mean, imagine being able to explain to someone in Congress why this would not work, and it's going to create an environment where the bad actors just take advantage of all of us, because that's what you're going to end up with.
This is the thing where I love, like, I don't know how many political action committees exist, like, focused on supply chain and transportation, but like there ought to be. And what they should be doing is helping Congress and different groups understand like how it works today, how it worked before, and how it should work going forward.
It's the same thing with the electric vehicles and the electric semis. You know, I'm an active on X, you're a Reddit guy, but every single time you talk about trucking, inevitably, I get these randos that talk about the Tesla semi, and they're always like, hey, the Tesla semi would solve this problem. Or if the Tesla
Where is the natural resources coming from?
How great is the Tesla semi and changing the way the industry operates? And if the Tesla semi was there, you wouldn't have truck drivers.
That's right. It solved everything.
Like we've delivered 200, I think, Elon Musk. And here's the problem, is legislatures in California have outlawed or have tried to outlaw internal combustion engines. That's and right. Even diesel engines have said by, I think it's 2035, the state of California can't sell, you can't produce, or diesel engines are not allowed to be CARB registered, which means you can't bring a diesel engine into the state of California. I believe that's the law. It's been some time.
The People's Republic of California
won't even sell like diesel trucks. The problem is, and what you'll see them say is, we'll use electric. And the issue is, you have Elon Musk, who I have an enormous amount of respect for Elon Musk, on stage with a Tesla semi, which I have, you know, right back here. That is actually one of 200 he's produced.
I gotta get me one of those. That's fantastic.
I don't know if they sell them anymore. That may be the only time you ever see one. Just kidding. Supposedly they're building a plant. They're going to get them out. But the problem is, you see this narrative, and then these Congress people and these people in the California legislature and the consumers see their electric vehicle and like, oh, Tesla's figured this out. Like, Tesla's delivering an electric semi, and my Tesla works, without understanding the reasons that the technology is not market ready. It's a physics problem, it's an economic problem, and there's all these other things. And I think that's the problem that we have in our industry. And the problem that we have with the FMCSA not being given much budget, and this really big safety problem and security problem that we have, an economic problem that we have, is the naivety and the lack of education, the ignorance that exists on how this stuff works.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm really close with a president of a major truck leasing company. And he kind of gave me the rundown of electric vehicles as they sit right now, 2026. These trucks are often 3 times more expensive than an internal combustion engine. They are heavier, so they can't haul as much freight. The infrastructure, which is the real issue, there is no infrastructure. What can charge an electric car absolutely unequivocally cannot charge an electric truck, not at today's rates. And so even to put in a few chargers, it's millions of dollars. And ultimately for fleets, there's no known residual value. I mean, you come from the trucking industry, asset base, like, you know the residuals on a diesel Freightliner. You know what you can get for it.
The best explanation that I can give is it's all total cost of ownership.
Yes, there you go.
Fleet, the 2 things, and maybe 3 things that they factor into this is, what is the total cost of ownership? What does it cost from the time that I buy that truck to the time I sell it? And they're worried about what is the operational uptime? What is the maintenance expense? What is the fuel efficiency of that truck? What is the insurance with that truck? The total cost of ownership calculation is what drives every single fleet decisions. The difference is, when you're a consumer and you buy a car, you rarely think about total cost of ownership.
You never do.
Consumers are not having the calculation in their head thinking, I mean, I'm sure there are. I mean, we all know someone in our own life that probably, they make every decision based on total cost of ownership. They're probably an accountant by trade, where everything is like, okay, this is going to cost me X number of dollars, and they've got this whole elaborate spreadsheet, and every single car. I knew a guy like this.
And those guys are all buying used cars. They're not buying new.
What's that?
They're all buying used cars. They're not buying new.
Used cars. I had a CFO that I worked with. Man, he had a car. It was a Honda. So he had his weekend car, and he had this beat up Honda that he would commute. And the commute was in a different town, about 30 miles from Chattanooga. And he would commute in this old Honda. It was probably 20 years old.
Yeah.
Because that was his daily commuter. And it was beat up and he didn't care because it was costing him 80 cents a mile, whatever the number, 20 cents a mile, whatever it was. That's how fleets make decisions. And the problem is, and consumers don't make, consumers make decisions on emotion. Mm-hmm. They don't make it on total cost of ownership. Fleets make it on total cost of ownership. And the problem is, until you have enough data out there, fleets don't know how to actually budget the Tesla semi or the electric vehicle. They also don't know what the dependency, like the issues are. You don't know how dependable these trucks are. Are they going to break down? Mm-hmm. You know, that we used to have a tracker of counting all. So Tesla had 30, when they first rolled it out, they had 30 semis they delivered to PepsiCo. It was sort of the first commercial rollout. And we were counting the total number that showed up, you know, because drivers would send this in. The total numbers that would get towed is like 18 of the 30 would like show up. And these weren't very dependable vehicles. And so that's the problem. The second thing you identify, which is an infrastructure issue, is the equivalent amount. This is an astounding fact, is to charge these vehicles. And I think it was The Economist that reported this, you need the equivalent of 4,000 American average homes to power up one semi. These charging, what do they call the high?
The quick charge stations.
The quick charge to do it for the superchargers, I think is what they call it. It's the power equivalent of 4,000 American homes over that period of time. I mean, it is astounding. And then you get into the whole, okay, who's going to work on the truck when it breaks down inevitably? Every moving vehicle, who's the technician? Where are they at? And so you have all these complexities that go in. You have physics problems because electric vehicles don't haul as much freight. They just don't.
That's right.
The batteries are heavy. They don't have the range that you have. And they haven't proven the total cost of ownership stats, nor have they proven the runtime and efficiency. And yet we have this great technology that doesn't break down very much, can go 500,000 miles, can go over. And guess what? There's infrastructure. In some ways, I have an electric vehicle and I love it. But in some ways, an internal combustion engine or a diesel engine is a superior experience than an electric vehicle if you're an over-the-road driver.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
it just is. Because the convenience of being able to fill it up as you need it and do it in 5 minutes is just worth something.
For a final mile fleet delivering parcels or doing bread and bringing it back to home and only working it for 12 hours a day, electric makes sense. But to your other point, first, where does the power come from? If it's still coming from hydrocarbons, you didn't solve anything when it comes to what you're producing in terms of efficiency.
Not to mention, and you haven't mentioned the lithium.
Yeah, the rare earth metals. Yeah, you need those, don't you?
Metals that go into those things. Like that's the hypocrisy of all of this is like, we are optimizing for a set of decisions that say we need electric vehicles because of this carbon problem we have in the atmosphere. Yet what we aren't talking about is what does it take to produce the electric vehicles? And I think a lot of this has to, and like I said, I have an electric vehicle, I have solar panels. It's this sort of like, when I put fuel in my car, and I'm talking like gasoline or diesel, I am aware of what I am doing. I can see it. I can see the carbon going into the vehicle. When I buy an electric vehicle and I plug it into the wall, I don't see those watts. I don't know where the supply chain came out. And it's the same thing going back to our Yellowstone reference. When you're eating vegan food or you don't think about all the stuff it
You just feel good. You feel like you did your part.
You feel good, but you don't think about what it took to get there. Or if you're eating meat, you don't think about that cow who, like if I had to slaughter my own cow, I probably wouldn't be eating beef.
Well, I think if you take it back to our initial conversation on IEPA, the idea that you can declare an emergency and make tariffs, if you get someone in the White House who doesn't understand the supply chain, but thinks, like you said, oh, we can all just go to electric tomorrow. Like you can have these crazy outcomes. So it's important for people to kind of recognize that you don't want to govern by emergency, and you want your legislators to probably understand how things actually work.
I think it comes back to education, Matt.
That's right.
We're here to help you, This is what Freight Expectations is all about.
1,000,000%. We're doing well, Craig, not because of the content that we have. I think we're doing well content generally, but it's all about the naming and the branding. Just like you said at the very beginning, you brand it correctly. You can do all sorts of interesting things.
You came up with this. And by the way, our lead-in video, our opening video is actually quite good. It was your idea to come up with Freight Expectations, which is a great name.
I love the fact that we get to collaborate because I'm just a humble country lawyer and you're a media mogul, but together we come in.
You're in the big city. I'm in the country out here, brother. I'm trying to get you to Tennessee.
We're working on it. I got your realtor's name. We're going to do some due diligence in the upcoming week.
You should come down here. We could imagine how much better Freight Expectations would be if you were in Tennessee.
I want a live studio audience. I can put some butts in seats.
We should do it. So by the way, we are going to be building a downstairs studio on the main road. Ooh. So you know how the Today Show has it.
Yes.
We should do Freight Expectations. This is a plug for South, who's our producer.
Yes.
Who's listening in because I'm reminding him that I'm expecting him to get this done soon.
Okay.
But we're going to we're putting our own studio downstairs.
That's
and
awesome.
It's going to be on the outside, so maybe people can come in. We'll have a nice studio audience that can come in and tune in. It'd be amazing.
I would love that. So I got to get the school year done.
One more reason for you to move to Tennessee.
My wife wants to. She loves Chattanooga. So we're closer than you think. We just got to get the school year done. I start teaching again in about a week from now.
I got to ask, what happened to Michigan, man? The arch rival. What is the latest on the coach there?
I have no idea. I have been living in a bubble, watching and refreshing my browser for IEPA news. I'll have to come back to you on anything with the sports related. I just know that I like when the Big Ten does well, and there's roughly 500 teams in the Big Ten currently. So I assume they're doing okay.
Very good. Well, Matt, as always, we will be here breaking down the news of the time as it relates into freight and hopefully providing some education so that people at home and our listeners can actually learn about how this stuff works so they don't encourage their Congress people to pass stupid laws.
That's the goal, man. Education is the best disinfectant for all bad things. And if people find this interesting, I hope they can share it and promote it and talk about it. We'll continue to do this as long as we find it interesting. And I think next week we got to touch on at some point autonomous trucks because there's a new bill in Congress that's going to make a federal supremacy over all autonomous vehicles. I think those come before the EVs. I really do.
What is the autonomous? What is this?
This new bill is in Congress is basically saying any state is not going to be allowed to make any regulations as it relates to autonomous commercial vehicles and maybe autonomous vehicles more generally. The idea being if the feds come in and say, we are going to set the standard, you're going to have this patchwork of state regulations go away. And that's going to allow companies like Kodiak and Aurora and others to really start growing. And if they have the regulations, there's no doubt the technology, as far as I know, is ready for prime time. It's just those pesky lawyers are involved. So
now I'm going to ask if Congress passes this law, do local municipalities have to allow autonomous trucks in their high? Is that required? I don't know how the states versus federal, how does that work?
Yeah, my expectation is, it's going to be a lot more work because it's just an initial bill proposed. But my belief is you are not going to be able to ban them from any of the public highways, so state and federal highways. That's going to be something that the trucks can use. There'll be some questions about smaller municipalities, but my belief is that this will ultimately move in the direction of a hub and spoke model or a relay network where there'll be a kind of zones of robots, maybe even lanes for robots. But if a state says we require a safety driver, the feds are going to say, no, you don't.
You mean even the local road
that
is completely funded by a county? Like I live in the county.
Yeah.
But because there are situations across the country where municipalities or counties pass laws where heavy duty trucks can't drive.
Yes. Yep.
Where does the government, we could unpack this when we talk about autonomous, but where does the government the federal government get to say what they can? Where does the local municipalities where counties get to decide they're not going to adhere to it.
Yeah, I think what's going to end up happening, and again, this we'll unpack it a lot more in the future, but my belief is it'll be kind of like weight restriction. So a weight restriction with a robot versus a non-robot, it's still, you can't do it. But if the feds come in and say, you are going to allow these trucks, and this is the framework by which they are going to be allowed on your roads, you're probably not going to stop them. And you might even have HOAs that try to pass rules to stop autonomous that might get destroyed. Because when the federal government says, we are the domain experts, we are the domain entirely, you do not get to comment, this is us, you can't stop it. That is federal supremacy. We don't see it often, but when we do, the feds always win.
Everybody's wanting to go back to the Articles of Confederation. That's what they're all going to ask for.
That's right.